Okay then, we're a little bit late, so we're trying to get started, and we've got,
Let's see, make sure it's working.
It's on.
I'm on. I don't know. So we wanted to invite all of you who are attending the Law and Licensing Committee today. My name's Carol Lear, and I'm the almost to be announced chair. So I was going to introduce our board chair, Mark Huntsman, and he wanted to take a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. Hey, I'm really excited to announce our committee chair is board member Carol Lear. So it is today in this meeting, it's Chair Lear, and the vice chair is board member Cindy Davis. So you guys have got a chair and a vice chair, and looks like your committee is ready to go, and want to thank the committee for the work that you do and work you're going to be doing today, and hopefully everyone that's in the audience has a good time in this committee. So I'm going to go to finance, not finance, finance, and finish my day. So carry on, be safe, and thank you for what you do.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair Huntsman. We probably should start by introducing the individuals around the table. I'm not one that'll I kind of like to be anonymous when I'm in the audience, so I'm not going to go through the whole audience, but I do hope when you come to the table, and if you have a comment, I sort of am a more informal person in terms of having discussions. So I hope if you do have a comment, whether you're a staff member, whether you represent an organization, you'll just raise your hand and I will try to acknowledge you as quickly as I can, maybe when a person's finished with a comment. But I would like to be able to have a discussion in this committee because the board meeting is sort of so formal that we sometimes don't get to interact with the people who are attending or have ideas. So let's begin with our newest board member and newest committee member, and that is Mr. Haynes. So go ahead, Mike.
How do you want me
Oh, just introduce yourself and speak into that mic. Turn it on. Speak into the mic and tell them your name and who you represent in terms of your board district.
Great. My name is Mike Haynes. I live in South Jordan, represent District 11. And I've been appointed to fill in for Lisa Cummins, who left the state. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Jenny.
I'm not going to stand up. Jenny Earl, representative of District 1, which is the northern part of Utah.
I'm Ben Rasmussen. I'm the Director of Law and Professional Practices for the board, and I help staff the committee.
I'm Brittany Cummins, District 6, which is parts of West Valley City, Taylorsville, West Jordan, Kearns area.
Cindy Davis, District 9, which is a lot of northern Utah County and around the lake to Genola, Alberta, and everything in between.
Okay. Thanks, Cindy. And Cindy's the vice chair of the committee. Oh, Cindy's the turn it on. There we go. Cindy's the vice chair of the committee.
Kathy Helgeson, committee secretary.
And Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy and staff to the Law and Licensing Committee.
Thank you. Thanks for those introductions. And I should have said I represent District 7, which is Salt Lake City and Park City. So with that, we'll get started because we're a little bit behind. We don't have too many things on the agenda, but all of them are important and interesting. So the first thing we have is a discussion of a waiver that was requested from Capstone Academy. And with that, would you folks like to come forward and introduce yourselves? You just push the button on the mic in order to start recording, and then why don't you just briefly explain? We have the information in front of us, but it would be helpful if you would explain what you're asking for.
Good afternoon, Chair Lear and committee. My name is Dr. Susan Goers. I'm the director of Capstone Classical Academy.
I am Brittany Donaldson, the Academy Manager.
So we're here today because we had our parents come to us last year asking us about changing our Friday times because we start school at 8:30 in the morning every other day, and on Fridays we were running from 8 to noon to get that 4 hours in. during the course of the year, the difference on Fridays was difficult for some of our carpools, but during the course of the year, we applied for and got a bus stop at Capstone Classical. We are right on Route 89, and we have a lot of students that come from Brigham City. And so they added us to the 6:30 route. And that happened mid-year, and the 6:30 route drops at Capstone at 8:17, and then picks in the morning, and then picks up on Fridays at 12:17. So it kind of aligned itself to say, hey, maybe we should. And the parents asked, can we just start at 8:30 on Fridays and still get out at noon so kids can get on the bus and whatever? And so we sat with the board and talked about it, and we said, sure, we're well over the 990 hours of instruction. We'll just put in a waiver and see if we can move Fridays from to 8:30 to noon so that it fits the bus and still fits parents who pick up students on their lunchtime. They can swing by, pick up their kids, and take them home.
Thanks. And tell me your name again.
Brittany.
Brittany.
Yeah.
Did you have anything to add? No. Thank you.
She just did all the paperwork and all
You're
the talking with Angela.
Paperwork on the support team, so thank you.
Yeah.
We have some materials that the Assistant AG prepared for us in terms of, we said before when we had a waiver request that it would be helpful if we had some comparison information.
Sure.
There are a number of schools that have asked for waivers, charter schools, traditional schools, and we thought it might be helpful to have that in front of us. So we do have some comparison information. The same Assistant AG also provided an additional information that we'll use, I think, going forward, but it might be helpful for our committee to have just a discussion of waivers another time, because this doesn't necessarily lend itself to discussing all the information that we have that would be helpful, but at least we have the things that Michelle prepared before that I think are really helpful. So with that,
Can I make one comment?
of course.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Just as a reminder, the board rule that allows for board waivers has some criteria in it, and I just wanted to make note. One of the criteria before you approve a board waiver is the evidence or the data, the academic data. And Capstone did provide us some of their internal NWEA assessment data, but as you know, so Capstone is a newer school. We've been in
This
operation
was our
1
first year,
right?
Yeah, we just completed.
And so because
You just finished your
first year,
Right.
So this month you'll be starting your second year in
year, right.
operation. So because of that, we have no school grading or RISE or SAGE historical academic proficiency data. So I just wanted to make note of that. But they did provide the NWEA data, which is their local assessment that their school uses.
And that
So-
internal data, all of our students, when they come in September, early September, we do a benchmark NWEA with them. And then in February, we do a second, and then in spring, we do a third. So all of those parents get all of the data of all of the growth for all of their students. Just because it's, for us, it helps us. With NWEA, we can drill down for our teachers and give them some tools. So that's why we provided that data, because that's what we had to show growth for our students.
Let me, I'm sorry, in order to give the committee members maybe a time to think about some questions, and I am hoping you already have some, but let me ask a few more, sort of to give us a little more background. How many students are at your school?
Last year, we had 160. Right now, our enrollment is sitting around 220,
Okay, and then how many, what grade levels?
grades 6 through 12.
6 through 12, and then you mentioned the bus route from, that is Bosfelder is helping you with, which is great.
It's the 6:30 line. It runs from Ogden Station all the way up through Brigham City.
It's UTA.
UTA.
Oh, it's just
Yeah,
UTA bus. How many of your students use that transportation?
At any given time, we had between, I'd say, 15 and 25 kids last year. A number of our incoming students will be using the 6:30 line.
And so most of your students are driven by their parents, is that right?
Carpools.
And do most of them, this is maybe slightly relevant, but how many are they mostly close to the school, or are they from?
We have students that come all the way from Kaysville.
Okay.
I would say that 50% of our students are within maybe a 6-mile, 7-mile radius.
Okay. And then what I just distributed to the committee members is a sort of a breakdown of R277-121, the board rule on waivers that kind of spells out for us in more of a checklist form the requirements for a school asking for a waiver. So I think with that background information and explaining what you just received and then what we had already, what questions do board members have, either comments or questions? The final thing I wanted to say, that the State Charter Board reviewed your request and the State Charter Board was comfortable enough to approve that. So any other questions by board members or thoughts? Cindy, was that light on to help me out here? Or? Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion?
Do you have a question?
You do have a question. Well, I was waiting for Brittany.
I move that we approve the Capstone Classical Academy request for a waiver from R277-219 to paren 31.
I'll second that.
And would you like to speak to that motion?
Just that this seems like a very reasonable waiver. They have an extended class time during the rest of the week, and they're only asking for a half an hour a week. And so I think it makes sense for what they're asking for and what they're providing their students in other ways. So I think there's nothing that's makes me hesitate to deny the waiver.
No other comments? Cindy?
I'll speak to the motion. I'm going to vote for this. I think it's reasonable. I think the start time makes sense. And I also agree with your statement that maybe at some point we need to have just a conversation about waivers in general and board rule, and why do we have a board rule if we have all these rate waivers, and does it need to be adjusted or kept or whatever? I don't know, but it begs a conversation at some point.
Thanks. I'll take the prerogative as the chair to just make a comment that I am sort of reluctant. I said to somebody earlier, Joy Lynn, I think, who was helping you folks out, I'm sort of reluctant about waivers because I feel like more school is always good school. I'm a kind of an old-fashioned educator in that way. I do see the value, though. I'm really kind of, I have two minds about this. I do see the value in starting at the same time every day. I'm not convinced that the number of students using the bus, which would be very convenient, I was thinking it would be more like half of your students. That's not particularly persuasive. I would probably feel better with this request if it were a year from now and we could look at how the school's doing and then be comfortable that a half an hour wouldn't make any difference. But I feel like if we have school for a half an hour, it's a meaningful half hour. So I hate to give that up too readily. So I'm just kind of explaining my double-mindedness about this. But with that, if there are no more comments, I'm not going to. Oh, Jenny.
And I was just going to voice my opinion. I just think that not necessarily, maybe just a little different a view. I feel like if you've got adequate things going on and that you're doing what needs to be done for families and for children and for the educators, that we're always, that as long as we're fulfilling those obligations, that that I think that this is an appropriate thing to ask for. So thank you.
And just one more question that occurs to me as Board Member Earl was speaking. You said some of your parents asked for this, but did you do a survey, or do you know of the 220 students, what percentage of the parents are interested in this?
Probably 45% or so in our survey at the end of the year said that they would prefer to be at the same time every day because of the carpool rotation. So depending on which parent is driving and what time they have to be to work, it affects what they're doing with their families.
Okay.
So when they came to us and asked us about it, they felt like we needed to be consistent now instead of changing things later in the game. just because parents are going to get into a routine. And so as we're expanding the school, we figured we would apply for it and see.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to amend the motion. Can I do that as the chair? I'd like to amend your motion, Brittany, and you can see if it's friendly and you would accept that, or if we should separate them. I'd like to look at this situation specifically in a year, when you've got some testing data and maybe more information from parents. And typically, I don't know that they're reviewed every year or annually, but I would, and I don't know that that will involve asking you to come back or anything,
That's
but
fine.
I'd just like to know in a year how the school's doing, and if the timing is has as much of an improvement as the parents want it to be. So is that an acceptable amendment to your?
I believe it's required that if any waiver that goes longer than a year has to be, has to be something that comes back to the board.
Oh,
it's
so we would
automatic.
discuss
It's
it in a
part
year
of-
anyway.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
part of.
and I didn't know that. Sure, go ahead.
So one thing that AAG Michelle Buse has done so lovely, and I'm just so grateful that she did it, was create this matrix. It's going to make us more organized to start asking schools like Capstone, if their waiver is approved, to come back and talk. We'll talk with you, Chair, and the committee about how you'd like to organize that, if you'd like to have a chunk of them come at the same time, or to try and have one or two come per meeting, because I think it's important that we start to establish that routine that has not been there. And so then Capstone would be, that is one of the requirements of the draft waiver, which is also up there on Civic Clerk as backup, is for an annual report. And you can determine if that's
Great.
an in-person verbal report to the committee, or if it's documentation that then we call up only those we have questions for. I think that might be a great agenda item for next month, if you'd
Yeah.
like to kind of establish that process.
That'd be
More
really
formally.
helpful. I'd feel a lot more on balance asking you questions and discussing this if we had a pattern or a more information in front of us about how these waivers go. So with that, let's put the motion to the rest of the committee. And if I restate it wrong, please correct me, Brittany. Board Member Cummins moves that the waiver under R277-121, skipping the subsections, for Capstone Academy for a start time of 8:30, or 8 instead of 8:30, which would,
No, 8:30.
8:30 instead of 8.
On Friday.
Would then make it consistent with the rest of the school days that the school has. So that's the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming, and thanks for
Good to see you.
listening to us stumble through this discussion when we don't have as much information as we'd like. The next item is an action item, R277-317, which is a new rule. And, okay. Ben Rasmussen, Travis Rawlings, Director of Licensing. Ben, do you want to join Travis or just stay there?
I'll just stay here. if
You
it's
want to
okay.
speak to us, Travis, about this?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Travis Rawlings, and I appreciate the promotion, but I'm actually the coordinator over licensing. Yeah, exactly. So this, first of all, just so you're aware, staff has prepared a recommended draft 2 that was posted this morning. So if you don't have access online and you would like a physical copy, I did make a few, I didn't make them, but we made a few physical copies. And then if anybody in the audience would like one, they're right here.
You're going to tell us.
It is on the board, yeah, and we'll talk through the changes. Yeah,
So the changes begin on line
they're towards the
76.
end, yeah.
76?
Yes.
Okay.
And obviously, I'll talk you through them, it's okay. Absolutely. So the rule itself is required because of a legislative change. The legislature teacher salary supplement program previously included stipends for national board certified teachers, as well as a program to reimburse teachers who have gone through that process to help facilitate that. So what they decided to do, I believe this was Senator Milner that sponsored this bill, is they wanted to separate the two, because instead of having TSSP money, that would actually, as you know, ran out of money this year, so they created its own program. So they separated the two. So the rule that you actually passed on second reading last night in board meeting took the national board certification reimbursement and those aspects out of the TSSP rule, and then this rule is intended to enfold those new requirements. Now, the other big change here is they're changing from a reimbursement model to a pay up front model. So it actually, rather than, and basically, just so you're aware, national board, it's a little under $2,000 total over a multiple year period. It's a $75 application fee. It's $475 per component. There are 4 components. Most people do 1 or 2 components per year. So that's about $1,000. We will not be paying for the registration fee. That was clear in the statute. We're just paying for the submission fee is what it's called. But anyway, the idea is this rule, has all the stipend information. So that's all pretty much similar to what was in the previous rules, just now in its own rule. And then it goes through and talks about in section 4, talks about all of the new aspect of these grants, because there are a lot of differences between a reimbursement model and a paying upfront model. And there's always some concern about money running out and issues like that. So the first thing to bear in mind is on line 68 and 69, these requirements in statute, just so you are aware, include a letter of recommendation from the principal ensuring that they're an effective teacher, that, pursuing this national board process. And so this application process, we basically need to take the applications. We'll see how much money there is. We did get some feedback here, so I'll mention a couple of things. The first one being, excuse me, there was concern about what to do if we run out of money, because there are basically 3 options. If you're looking at, okay, we've run out of money, how do we select who gets money? So actually, I guess there's 4. You could reduce the amount. You could do a merit-based application system. You could do a first-come, first-served application system, or you could do a lottery system. As we went through this and looked at it as staff, we had several discussions. We really felt like the best model for this particular program was a lottery, in that we're awarding multiple-year grants. So if a person comes in and they're applying for this, they include a plan of how they're going to get their national board, which is normally 2 or 3 years. And so once they have that grant, they'll be getting it for multiple years. We're encumbering funds. So if we tried to do a merit-based, the timelines don't quite work. We don't have enough time to do that. If we tried to do reducing, that kind of misses the intent. Our understanding of the intent was to encourage more teachers to do this, so we were paying up front. And so when you can only say, well, I'm only going to pay half of it, then a lot of them just aren't going to do it, is the concern. And so that's why we landed on the lottery. But in order to make sure that that's clear to people, that's why we added in draft 2, line 82 and 83, that talks about publicly publishing the number that are going to be available. Because we want to make it absolutely clear, as people are considering whether or not they want to get into this very involved, very in-depth process, they need to understand we may or may not have enough money. So we want to tell them up front, okay, we're going to have enough money for 15 people this year to get started, and we'll go from there. But that early notification, excuse me. One of the things that understand, by the way, I haven't gone into a lot of details of the national board process itself, but the timing is a little bit odd. You can actually start declaring you're going to be doing national board in the April prior to the school year you're going to do it. So there are already people who have declared that they're going to do national board next year. And then you have to have the funding paid to national board by February 28th. So that's where our issue of application and process comes in. We have to have the money to National Board by February 28th.
You have to pay all up front?
So what we will be doing is the plan. Can I finish and then I can answer that question? Okay. So they have to pay February 28th, and then they have until April to mid-May is when they actually do the submissions. And what it is a person will declare how many of the 4 components they will do. That's what the plan is for. They're going to tell us, I'm going to do 2, I'm going to do 3 this year, I'm going to do 1. Most people, like I said, did do 1 or 2 per year. And then whatever they've declared, that's what we would pay to National Board by February 28th.
Of the school year before
Of the school year they're doing it. No, so they're April here, and then we do the applications because we don't even have the money till here, and then that's when we have to. Yeah. Of their plan, yes, of their plan. Yeah, that's the idea. Because of that, we also added, originally when I wrote this rule, I was actually, I was assuming, we should never assume, I was thinking they had to reapply every year, but that doesn't make sense. When you apply for this grant, it's intended to get you through a multiple year process. And so if that's the case, then we need to be notified if something will discontinue. So that's where line 90 to 94 come in, just notifying us if they're not going to continue, or they're going to, or that for some reason they become ineligible for it. One other thing that was brought up just before this meeting that you may want to consider directing staff to add or prepare an amendment for next month is the possibility that if a person is awarded a grant, there may need to be a procedure for a person to amend their plan and get it approved. So like, let's say my original plan was to do 1 in the first year, 2 in the second year, 1 in the third year. And then it turned out I could only do 1 in the second year. There might be a reason to amend a plan, and we had not even thought about that, quite frankly, until it was mentioned to me. And so that may be something you'd like to direct staff to prepare for next month.
Thank you, Travis, for that very good explanation. Do board members, committee members have any questions, thoughts? Brittany, Board Member Cummins.
If a applicant doesn't make it through the lottery process, can they use their same application for the following year to apply for the grant, or does it have to be redone?
I hadn't considered that. I think off the top of my head, redone would be most appropriate because of the principal recommendation letter that's required. But I could honestly see it being implemented both ways. I could argue either way on that one.
So there's nothing in the rule that would
Direct that, no.
direct it. They could use some of the same materials
Yes.
and be prepared to
Yep.
just resubmit the next year. Okay. Can I ask another
Sure,
question?
please.
So you mentioned the money that's due in February of the planning year. Is that money amount the entire amount for the plan that's been submitted so that we send that, or is it you pay on a yearly basis dependent on what is going to be happening
That's a
in that
good
year?
question. We've actually had some difficulty communicating with National Board, which is why this rule is actually a little bit later than we wanted it to be. So we don't know the exact details, but my understanding is that the individual has to pay for whatever they're submitting that year. So if their plan tells us that they're going to submit one submission this year, then we would pay for one submission that year, and so forth.
Sure, please.
So then if they discontinue, mid-submission, so they're in the middle of a year and they discontinue, the money that's paid isn't going to be reimbursed from National Board, so it's just incomplete. You just wouldn't continue paying.
That is
Okay,
correct. That is correct.
That prompted thought that now just left me. So, other questions, Cindy? Board Member Davis?
Is that something procedurally that we can do in this meeting? Just add a line, like line 95, or add a D. You've got A, individual discontinues, B, the individual becomes ineligible, C, the individual becomes ineligible, or D, the individual needs to amend the plan. Then they notify the superintendent. It gives the option there.
Sure. I mean, that suits me. Can we hold that thought for a second? Because I think there might be, I think your other amendment request, or your suggestion for another amendment is a good one. And I'd like to incorporate that. And I also had another thought about an amendment, so we may either, if we can't do them all today, but that reminds me what I was going to ask. So this won't begin this year. It will begin for next school year?
It actually does begin for this school year, which is why on lines 72 and 73 directs the superintendent to have an expedited process for the current school year.
I'm sorry, I was a lazy reader there. That's really helpful, thank you. So it will begin this school year?
Yes, it will.
Board Member Earl.
So what if they don't make the lottery and they decide the first year to just pay for it themselves, but they apply the second year? Is there that kind of a thing is allowable?
That would be allowable, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Would
that considered amended plan or something, or just a plan for that? I don't know. I'm just trying to think where they've already started. And
so if they've already started, working through National Board doesn't necessarily require a plan.
So it's just what we're requiring.
We're requiring it, yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just trying to keep notes on the things that we may want to add to this. Any other thoughts, questions? One of my concerns, and this is a little reminiscent of a program that a few of you might remember that was for special ed teachers to get this same kind of compensation. I think it started out with, it wasn't just special ed teachers, it was other kinds of, maybe it was STEM teachers, and then
I believe you're thinking of PJEP.
PJEP, right, morphed to, I actually remembered, amazingly, the acronym, but it morphed into also special ed teachers. And because I can't remember if it was on that committee or helping that committee, but what we found was there was a surprising large number of teachers who started this, took the money, and this was also a several-year program, got into it and just quit, and never finished the requirements, and became quite a problem. And what I wished, as we looked at that rule a decade ago, was that we built in something to the back end that said, if you quit for other than compelling reasons, or I'm not even, certainly if there's some catastrophic condition in your life, you don't want to pile on to someone. But there were a lot of people that just got started, felt like it was too hard, but they then squandered that money. So we wished we'd built in some kind of a payback requirement or something along those lines. So I'm noting that in this, it just ends. They have to notify the superintendent if the educator discontinues, becomes ineligible, changes her mind, whatever, but there's no payback provisions or contemplation. Do you want to speak to that?
Absolutely. So I had a similar concern. So the first aspect of this that helps prevent that issue is this money goes directly to National Board.
Okay.
It doesn't go through the educator. We're again, we've had trouble getting communication, but we're supposed to pay to them directly. We're not supposed to pay the educator.
Okay.
The other part of it is the way National Board works. It is possible that we as the state board pay for a submission by February 28th. They fail to submit it in the April and May that follows. That might be a cause to discontinue the grant. But it's a risk that when I discussed it with Senator Milner, she was willing to take, because her primary goal was to increase the rate at which teachers get this. She really wanted to encourage it, and it's such a small ask. It's only about $200,000 a year or so, stipend and this included.
Okay.
We only have about, let's be honest, 10-ish people in Utah doing National Board each year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's a really small ask.
Very manageable number.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful information. So, other thoughts or questions? Could we add then the two things I had written down that we wanted to add, and I don't want to delay this because you clearly need to get it going, but the two things we wanted to add were an amendment that that an educator could request that her plan be amended, and that maybe just as a notification to the superintendent, who then works with her. Does that seem complicated? Hang on, let me just finish my other thought, and then you can respond. And the second idea was that that and this would, I'll see what the committee likes and doesn't like. I think it makes sense if you've done the work to apply and you don't get selected, that you at least stay in the queue for 2 years. So for another year, so that there's a 2-year chance to be chosen. Would that make sense? That some kind of an amendment that said, if a person applies and is not selected in her first application year, that her application will remain current for a second year?
Why don't you have Ben respond to the first one, and I'll think about that
Okay.
second one real quick.
So, with regards to the first one, and following Cindy's, Board Member Davis's suggestion, I had just drafted a possible paragraph D to add at the end on line 95, that we could add the individual requests approval for an amendment to the individual's application plan. And then the superintendent could follow up on that if the individual requests that approval.
Sure, that sounds great for that. And what do you think, Travis?
So the concern I have is because when I went through the different ways of, what happens if money runs out, it was getting complicated. And this further complicates that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But what happens is, so then you have someone who applied, didn't receive the funding, and paid for it anyway,
Or maybe
found somebody else's money to do, there's other ways to get funded, and somebody who just dropped it completely. And so then I feel like I would have to start, measuring weights and things, and I was uncomfortable with that, and that's why I went with it. But you could certainly add that kind of criteria, and we would implement it, absolutely.
Board Member Davis.
How laborious is the application, like to do it again
Yeah.
the next year?
It would require, it's an online application that hasn't been created yet, but it'll be pretty slick. At least that's the intent. The letter of recommendation may or may not need to be updated if your principal changed, and your plan may need to be revised. But that would be
But not necessarily.
not necessarily, no.
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 Okay. Can I make a motion?
Yes, please. Board Member Davis.
Well, I think that needs to be addressed in a different part than this one. So
Okay.
I move that we add in R2,
Yeah.
I move that we add in R277-317-1, or no, -317, a line 95 to read as Ben just read, and maybe he could repeat that for us.
So add subparagraph D, the individual requests approval for an amendment to the individual's application plan.
And I didn't listen carefully enough. But that amendment is before us, as read. And all in favor of that amendment on line, it would be a new line 95.
As for discussion.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any additional concerns or thoughts about that amendment? I think it's pretty straightforward. Okay, with no discussion, then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for helping me. Does anybody in the public have any thoughts or concerns now that we voted on this amendment? But does anybody have any concerns about the rule? I'm still contemplating what to do about the person who's made the effort to apply being able to have 2 shots at it without a new application. But does anyone have an interest in speaking to this in the public? It looks like not. Thank you. Thanks for reminding me, though. So what you're thinking it's just not that big a deal and they should just reapply. Is that right, Travis?
I'm thinking the numbers are so small that I don't think it's asking them to reapply is not a heavy lift. I mean,
Okay.
we're not asking, it's not like applying to graduate school where you have to go get 3 letters of recommendation and transcripts, and we're not asking for that.
Okay. Board Member Cummins.
So just speaking to the nature of the application then, if it's going to be an online application, are they going to be able to upload documents or is it going to be fillable? Because if it's fillable, then it is kind of repetitive to have to refill it. But if it's, I can upload documents, then they could reuse some similar information. Is that?
So unfortunately, we're still in the very early stages with IT of detailing our requirements for the program, so we have no idea. But it is our anticipation that we would pull in the past. That's a good way to say it. In TSSP, we try to pull as much information that we already have available so that it doesn't have to be manually entered. So like in the TSSP, you don't have to once you've created your login and tie it to your Cactus ID, it pulls in all the Cactus information. You don't need to put in your name again. So I would anticipate we would have very similar automation to that.
Thank you. So in the spirit of moving this forward, I won't worry about that, but if you'll make a mental note among
Sure.
all your other things that let's just see what happens and
We'll monitor that, absolutely.
And we can just see that if it would make sense to consider those applications, if there are more than a few, that we could give those people a chance in
Certainly.
in a second year if we can, and I'll try to remember that too. So with that, do you have a motion to act on R277-317? Board Member Cummins?
I move that we approve R277317, National Board Certification as amended on first reading,
Specify
draft 2 as amended on first reading, and recommend it to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. Am I supposed to repeat the motions?
Yes.
Okay. The motion is, thank you, very good motion, Board Member Cummins. The motion is that the committee approve R277-317, Draft 2, Incentives for National Board Certification as amended, and pass it on first reading, and pass it to the board for second and final reading. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Thanks, Travis.
I'm the next one, too.
Oh, not so quick. Don't get rid of you just yet. Hang on a second while we do our little backtracking. The next item on the agenda is action on a repeal of R277-521, and I think we kind of alluded to why that's being repealed, but you want to speak to that?
Just that we're.
Better introduce yourself again.
Oh, okay.
Still Travis Rowley.
There will be there's a transition phase in which we will do some reimbursements that have already occurred because of the way the statute is worded, but the rule itself is no longer necessary as it's not moving forward. We would simply use the rule as it was constituted as the guidance, and it can be repealed at this point without issue.
Okay. So I'll accept a motion to do that. Cindy?
I move that the committee repeal R277-521 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading.
Thank you. The motion is that the committee repeal R277-521 and recommend on first reading and recommend to the board on second reading that the rule be repealed. Final also, not just second reading. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Thanks, Travis. Now, thanks, Travis.
Thank you.
Our next item on the agenda is an action item R277-487, another rule, public school data confidentiality and disclosure, which is being continued or proposed to be continued and amended. And Whitney Phillips.
Hi.
Hi.
Good morning, or afternoon.
Afternoon. It's so afternoon. But welcome.
Thanks. Whitney Phillips. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer here. And Ben and I worked on the revisions to this rule. It is up for its 5-year. Tell me what the
So
word
it's
is,
up,
Ben.
it's up for its 5-year review. If I can point out that if you look at the rule that we have deleted a number of sections that are kind of duplicative of the data privacy statutes that are already in place. And there's also been some technical changes, and we'd be happy to answer your questions about those if you have any.
So let's just give us a minute to scroll through it.
I have a few things.
Okay.
Is that all
Hold
right
on
if I
one
start?
thought. Let me just get through them so I know. I remind myself what it looks like, and then you will first on the queue. Quite a few changes, actually. Okay, questions. Board Member Earl.
So if we can go to line 64. And sorry, now mine's pulling up. So it gives a definition of expunge. It doesn't match the law. So this says expunge in ours means to seal a record so as to limit its availability to all except authorized individuals. And maybe you'll just have to help me, but in the law, and let me take you to, so I'm looking at 53E 9301. It says that expunge has a different definition. It says means to seal or permanently delete data as described, and then it gives that. So I just think that probably needs to be, is there a different meaning for this one? Is there a reason for a different meaning?
No, that's a really good question. This expunge to seal or permanently delete, we thought that was it's a either or, and we use the model of the definition to expunge for criminal justice. This is their definition to expunge. I think one of the reasons we chose to do it this way is the practicability of deleting data is more complicated than I had ever imagined it to be. And so with feedback and with talking to our advisory group, this definition seemed appropriate for education because sometimes it takes a while for data to truly delete because of backups to data. And so you can delete, let's say, at the LEA level, but if they have data backups in case of an emergency, sometimes it takes a number of months, even sometimes, for that to kind of go down the line and delete. And this is something that maybe IT could speak a little more clearly on.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't really want a permanent delete. Anybody in the audience that, when you said any IT person in the audience that could elaborate on that, Whitney, that you had in mind, or?
Let me see if someone is here.
Because just while you're looking, Chair taking prerogative, it says that.
Do you want to go back to the
Yeah, I'm just thinking it might be more appropriate to have the same definition in this rule that's in the companion statute. I think, and Angie mentioned, I know this expungement issue is kind of difficult for everybody, and the truth of it is the state board benefits from it because the state board has access to expunged records if they're criminal records. And so if they're permanently deleted, that takes away the board's ability to sometimes know information that the board would like to know. So though it is a challenge for people who believe their records are expunged only to find them dredged up again 10 years later. It has some advantages. So I guess my druthers would be to use the definition from the companion statute, which isn't a big deal. Any other, obviously other comments? Board Member Davis?
No, sorry.
You didn't mean that. Board Member, so do you have anything further on that?
I mean, we're talking student data, and in the law itself, it states expunge as something different. If we mean something different, then yeah.
So it means the definition of.
So yeah, I'd like to make an amendment that says the same as the term used as described in section 53E 9301. And realizing that there may be difficulties with that, but at the same time, I just think it needs to match the student data privacy law.
It's still an or, so there shouldn't be a
Yeah.
difficulty there.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I mean, 65 and 66.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
making this connection.
Uh-huh.
Is to just say expunge means
Okay.
the same as that term is defined in
53,
3G.
Okay,
yeah,
Is that-
53E 9-301.
okay.
You want it to say defined, not described, Andrew?
Yes, defined,
Oh, yeah.
because it's defined, not just described. I know.
A term means the same as the terms defined
Defined
in.
in,
Okay.
And then just the
Okay,
section.
all right.
Yep.
Let's deal with that amendment
And
first,
no
if that's
eight.
okay.
Don't do the eight.
Oh, don't do the eight?
Just no, because
Okay.
then if they read a number, we have to renumber
Okay,
it. There's only
that's
one.
fine.
Yeah.
So, Board Member Earls proposed an amendment on lines 65 and 66 that would change the definition in this rule of expunge, which would now read, expunge means the same as the term is defined in subsection or section,
Just section.
section 53E-9-301. Discussion to that. Board Member Cummins.
So my question just is the circular nature of the wording of it, because in code, it says there's an or statement as described in board rule, and then we're not describing anything in board rule. We're
Yes,
not
we're
deciding if we're going to do one or the other or both or whatever. And so I guess the question is should we in board rule
Yeah.
describe exactly what it is that we're going to do?
Have we described that
So-
somewhere else?
No, so that Chair, or may I
Go
say?
ahead, please.
So I think, and thank you, because now
Yeah.
that helps reframe.
I
I
kept
think that
thinking
is why pointing back to that definition isn't necessarily appropriate, because it does provide the or, and as Whitney stated, we then selected the definition we did to kind of make it clear if it was going to be the seal or permanently delete. And I remember this discussion, it seems like a couple of years ago, where we had a very robust discussion, and we did have members of our IT staff as well as the LEA representatives explain that permanently delete is kind of a foul. It's not really possible right now because of all the backups. And so instead they seal it. So no, there's no access to it versus deletion. Is that correct, Whitney?
I'd
So-
say it has been a while, and we all learn over the years. I think having that same definition as the statute is appropriate as long as there's an or, because there are things that can be permanently deleted. If I set fire to a piece of paper or something, that's probably deleted, and that could be a record. But so having that or, and it being a number of years since we've discussed it, I think it's appropriate to use that definition.
To use the definition we have currently in the rule, or to use this definition?
To have the
I think we'd have
definition in
to-
statute, if,
Well, if you were going to use the statutory definition, you'd probably, instead of referring
Ben,
to the
would you like to
statute.
speak?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
If you were going to use the statutory definition, because it refers back to the rule, you'd probably just want to mimic the language of the first part of
But
the statute.
take out the board rule
Instead of
part.
referring to the statute.
I agree.
So how would it read?
Just
Expunge means,
Means, sorry, let me find it.
oh, and just,
Expunge means to seal or permanently delete data, period.
okay.
If you want to just restate what it says there.
I see. So that's your recommendation. You think that would be a better, that's your opinion? Is that right, Whitney? Okay. And Brittany, would you like to speak?
So just the question that I have then is this board rule directing LEAs, or is this how the state deals with data? And are we directing, saying an LEA can either seal or delete information and consider it expunged? Or so I'm just making sure that it's okay that the option is available, or do we need to create a standard of what we expect that data to look like when it is expunged?
I think it's, may I answer?
I think yeah, go ahead.
I think it allows them to do either, if you state it that way. Agreed? Versus right now, the standard is to seal so that nobody has access except those authorized.
And and I'd also like to add that my light, I keep forgetting if my light's on or off, that it seems like it could apply to the state. It could apply to our office as well as
Does.
an LEA.
It does. doesn't it?
Which would then mean that the board could do one or the other also.
That's my
So, do we have an amendment to propose? Let's try this amendment. So, can we just wipe that amendment out of our thoughts?
Yes. So it would just be this.
And so then, let's go ahead. Jenny, do you want to propose or do you want me to? I don't want to steal your thunder here.
Yes. So what did we decide on?
So-
Is that what
just
it's up there?
the part that's highlighted in
Expunge
blue.
means, yeah, just
Okay, so expunge means to seal or permanently delete data.
Period.
Period.
And then are we, okay.
Okay.
So that's what
the
our
proposed amendment.
new-
Now we have discussion to that. Board Member Cummins.
Sorry, I just lost my place in the rule, but I believe it says, it talks about the people who could get access to it, right? Authorized individuals. So do we somehow have to address that? 'Cause if
Except to
it's-
authorized
if-
individuals.
So if something's deleted, then it obviously can't have access to authorized individuals. And so is that an important piece to this? Is there authorized individuals who need access to expunged? And so then the sealing portion would be more appropriate and not the deletion part of it. And so it's in there.
Maybe we're just having a conversation from a few years ago. AAG Buse, would you like to add to this discussion?
Yes, Michelle Buse, Assistant Attorney General. There are occasions when we do need to go back and be able to access the records, perhaps for litigation, because the statute of limitations does not run out for an extensive period of time for a student because they haven't reached the age of majority. And their statute of limitations is told until they reach the age of 18. So although there are some things that a parent, rightly so, would want to have removed, there are some things, some records that as an education entity, we need to maintain but have sealed and not have available in the same manner as a student who's actively attending the school still. Does that give you a...
Go ahead.
So that just leads to the question of if we just say expunge means to seal or delete, then you're leaving that open. And does a LEA know what those documents are that should be available in future reference and what's not? And so I guess that's
why
why-
maybe
Is
so
there-
long ago
is
we
there-
took this route. AAG Buse.
Yes, we have, State Archives has established a record retention schedule that lets us know which records are important enough for us to keep beyond the student's attendance, beyond 1 year past the student's attendance. There are statutes that are in place that are specific with regard to special education records. So they aren't kept forever, except for their transcript and the record of their overall record and transcript. That's one that's kept forever about a student. But the other records, the education entity relies on the retention record to know how long to keep it.
Can I add something?
Sure. Whitney also was agitating or saying she'd like
Sorry,
to, maybe you're
I'm
thinking
agitating.
of the same thing.
If you go to line 202 of the rule, you'll notice that we did reference that unless the data requires permanent retention per the retention schedule, an LEA's retention schedule shall require destruction or expungement after administrative need. And then 205, we kind of mimic the words of FERPA, which has a right for a parent to amend. FERPA doesn't say a right to expunge, but we include the word as expunge is an option in amending, adding or expunging or modifying. And so a parent may request that. So these are kind of ad hoc if a parent wants to request it, if it doesn't conflict with the retention schedules. I don't know if that helps.
And what I was going to add is that I think generally with expungements, when a record is sealed, it's anticipated that if you want to unseal it, you would have to have a judge or someone with appropriate authority consider requests based on good cause shown or based on a specific law. So I don't know that you necessarily need to specify or come up with who might have access to that. They'd have to establish that under existing law to whoever has authority to open that record.
So I'm trying to decide what this
Okay,
leaves us.
so let me understand, now that I've gotten all
All
the
this-
previous.
all this information.
Yeah. So what line was that on?
And what we're
Line-
back to line 65, 66.
So on line, hold on. So on line 58, it talks about destroy. We're using that, right, as in means to remove data or a record. So we're using that as that definition. Here we're using expunge as in the sealing of unless being able to get into, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
We use the term destroy there when we're talking about third-party contractors that have our data or LEAs that provide that data, and that's when that term is used.
So it wouldn't, are
so-
we?
So it's more of destroying kind of a large data set of what a third-party vendor may have.
So on line 205, you wouldn't be using destroy to refer to that same thing? Then, so on 205, a parent or adult student may request that an LEA amend, expunge, or destroy any record. So that has a different definition there?
No, that has the
That
same
would have the
definition.
same definition?
Yeah.
Okay, so in this case, sorry, my apologies, I felt bad, we've had this discussion for 15 minutes. It is covered, even though expunge is defined differently, or a different way in the law, we are covering it under two different definitions here. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
I'd like to just withdraw my amendment, please. Right, because am I understanding this right? Does it not cover what we
I think
need?
I
Okay.
think we've got destroyed in other places. I think we've got a reasonable, given the nature of this, I think
Yeah, even though
okay to-
expunge in the law
is a little bit different. I think it's, did you have a thought about that, Angie?
Well, just one clarification though, because the destroy below, down in 205,
Right.
would not apply to destroying the data that the LEA has at a parent's request. That would only be the destruction of data that a third party had for a temporary time usually. They usually have it for the term of the contract, correct, Whitney? Or,
The one in 20 whatever?
oh, it does say of an LEA
Yeah.
or a third party
Yeah.
contractor, so never
So
mind.
It could be
Yeah.
either, that's what I thought.
Is that accurate
Yep,
then?
yep, yep.
Okay. So without objection, we'll let Board Member Earl withdraw that amendment, right? Great.
Do you want me to make any more comments on this? or-
No. But if you have other amendments, we'll.
I do
entertain.
have other amendments.
Okay, go ahead.
But, there's a section here I think needs to be reworded, and it's down on 400. It's the URAD, and I don't know that I have a perfect wording for it,
Just
but,
keep forgiving us.
sorry, let me keep skimming here till I get it. So we've just gone through all this
400 and,
400.
oh, just
Above, just a
400.
little above it, right? That whole section?
Yeah, well, it
Starting
starts
at
at 395.
Okay.
Well, it's 395. That's the parent information section about what parents can do with data or whatever with URAD and stuff. But I mean, if you start reading that section, it just starts with a parent of a child whose personally identifiable student data was shared. That we're stating that's how we're quantifying it. A parent, and we were already saying that parent, their child's data has been shared. Anyways, I just think it needs to be worded different. We need to have something like the rights of parents or something like that, and then underneath that list off what their options are, kind of a thing. Does that make sense?
I think I know what you're saying. You're wanting more of that information
Well,
that was in the letter? Is that what you're saying?
A
In
little
this
bit like that,
section?
yeah, because we've kind of quantified it. We've said within 30 days, you've got, you need to be notified, but none of that's actually in our policy here, our rule.
So let's go back to the statute and see what the, do you remember which statute it is? Hang on one
It's
second.
53
53.
9
E dash-
301.
Oh, the 301 is where we just were.
Three-
I
it
think
was
it's
not
308.
308.
Probably.
Oh, this is the new one, about the
know
specific
if
to
it's in
URAD,
there or
isn't it?
not.
No, I think it was.
Does this seem right? Is it you read in here, or is it, there's a...
Well, I
it's on
have it,
second.
I'm looking at 307, it has it under there, I don't know if that's the only part, is it?
Sorry, we're just needing to find this. Let's see.
There's two, I should have...
Okay, that's all
Sorry.
right. So that's 26 dash,
It's actually in both places. So what I don't know is if the parents' right stuff is, it might be here. Here it is. It's in 53,
9308.
53E 9308, yes.
Okay.
And it
308.
says, right here, in subsection 6B.
In accordance with state and federal law and subject to subsection B, blah, 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 the state board shall share student data, including personally identifiable student data, as requested by the Utah Registry of Autism and Developmental Disabilities described in section 26-7-4. It goes on to say, at least 30 days before the state board shares student data in accordance with the education entity from which the state board received the student data shall provide notice to the parent of each student for which state board intends to share student records. State board may not, for any particular student, share student data as described in the above subsection if the student's parent requests that the state board not share that student data. So,
I'm just wondering, and I don't know that we want to go through and do all the wording now, I just wonder if we can rework that so we've got the actual law in there.
or we
refer
could
to
just
the law.
refer to that,
Yeah,
maybe.
either.
It is signaled to.
Is it just the part that you have the opportunity at the end that she read to not have it shared? Sorry, thanks. Is it the part that you want added in to line 397 that just that you, the opportunity to not have that data shared? Is that the part of the law? Because the rest is similar.
Yeah.
So could we just add that wording at the end of 397?
Or could we just reference the law?
Yeah, because you wouldn't want to restate the law, but we could say,
It could say, a parent of a child whose personally identifiable student data were shared with the Utah Registry of Autism and Developmental Disabilities has the right to access the exact records disclosed and has the rights identified under statute B. Would that
be
be?
notification. So may I just say
Yeah,
something?
please.
I think that before the state board shares, the education entity has to then send this notification. And I guess the question is, do you just want that to be restated or like a signal to it that say parental notification is required as described in here? Because if we start to restate them, the problem is the statute could change and the board rule hasn't, and people rely on the board rule. I don't know, I'm trying to think.
Not to
And
mention.
two, I just think it needs, and I'm sorry, I probably should have worked through this last night sometime, but I just think it needs to be clear stated what the options are for parents and maybe pulled out a little better than it is.
And
Yes.
so, go ahead, Brittany. Board
So-
Member Cummins.
My question is are we talking about two slightly different things? Because this is actually talking about after the data
It
is
is.
already there. I, as a parent, have the right to access and see exactly what they're seeing.
What's shared.
Whereas everything, the stuff that's in that paragraph of the law is talking about the responsibilities of the
notice
agency and the
requirement.
notice requirements to parents. And so are they slightly different, and should we be linking them if they're just a little bit different from each other?
And I'm also,
I think you, sorry.
I guess if we were to do this, I would rather just say a parent of a child has the rights to
Opt out.
the rights of notice and sharing data consistent with or under R2 or under this statute, so that it just encompasses both of them and doesn't belabor them. But that takes the exact wording out of the rule, and because we're not supposed to repeat the language of the law and rules.
Yeah,
Does that
I think
trouble?
something like that. would work.
Does that satisfy you?
Yeah. So would that be a C or?
I think you could just do it together in A, but let's see if Ben has an idea.
I was just going to say, if you look further up on line 370, we're already directing the superintendent to follow this subsection B in sharing data, and that would include the sending notice and giving parents the option to opt out there. So we may already have that Is that,
refers to that written agreement that we talked about earlier. Does that comfort you any, Jenny?
can we beef
Just a
that
second,
up,
let me
or-
look down through it. Okay, because it does refer to B, is that why?
Uh-huh.
Let me look back at what we have there.
The code, what's the number of the code?
Okay, yeah, I think that does.
Does that satisfy
Okay,
your
so I-
concerns? So you withdraw that one too?
Yes.
Without objection, we will allow Board Member Earl to Committee
go take
Member
a
Earl
break.
to take a deep breath. Thank you, Jenny. Any other thoughts? Okay. With that, we'll accept a motion to, I think, golly, I've lost track of, hang on a minute. To take, I forgot, is it, yeah, where are we?
I'm ready. You want me to do it?
I lost my little written agenda. So we'll take a motion by somebody. Thank you, Board Member Davis.
I move that the committee continue and approve R277487 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
The motion before us is for the committee to approve R277-487, Public School Data Confidentiality and Disclosure Amendment, and as amended and continued, yes, on first reading.
I don't think we're as amended.
Well, there were just amendments that you made, so it's draft.
Did you end up making it? I don't
There's
think so.
Technical changes.
Yeah, we
Okay.
didn't end up amending.
Okay,
She
so
withdrew.
only as amended in draft one, not as amended further. And that's on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. So that's the motion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? And I forgot, did anybody in the audience have any possible thoughts about this that you'd like to communicate after the fact? But we would go back if it were important enough. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Whitney.
She's for the next one too, so.
Okay, Whitney, the next,
External data. right?
yeah.
She just CC'd me on it. That's why I stopped.
Oh, thank you. And you're on for the next item also. This is item 6.5, which is an action item on external data requests.
There are two external data requests for this month, and both of them have USBE staff that support the research. They're also, so this first one, I guess, are there any questions about either of them?
Yeah, that's, well, why don't you go ahead and describe them a little bit first?
Well, this first one, I would like to look at very high-level, state-level aggregate data with our WIDA assessment for English language learners. And the second one would like a number of university professors are interested in our dual language immersion program and are interested in de-identified student level data, and that is supported by our specialist, Carl Bowman, here.
Thank you. So, any committee member questions to those? Brittany?
So the first request, it says WIDA Alt, so is that just really specific to a few students?
Yes, it's that 1% of students that take the WIDA test.
So the WIDA Alt is not a subset of WIDA?
That's right.
It's just the WIDA?
It is a subset, or it's not
No.
a subset?
From what I understand, it is a subset of WIDA.
Of WIDA?
It's like the DLM or the
Oh, I think that Assistant Superintendent Voorhees has a, would you like to, Leah, come forward, just so we have you on the, sorry to bring you from your comfort zone. Thank you.
Sorry. Assistant Superintendent Voorhees, thank you. Whitney's correct. It's the 1% of students who have significant cognitive disabilities. So students that do take the alternate assessment, which is the DLM. So students who are instructed in alternate standards and take alternate assessments, all of whom have significant cognitive disabilities.
Okay. And go ahead.
Just to follow up then with that question, is the sample size large enough that, I know this is state aggregate, but if you only have a very few students who are taking that, is there any concern with the ability to identify students with that small of a sample?
I'd say in this case, no. But sometimes, yes, if they were to ask us to look at this by gender and ethnicity, and then it gets smaller and smaller, but these are percentages for the entire state of Utah. So they're not going to know who they are.
So is that satisfy you? Thank you. Other questions from, go ahead, Ms.
I was just going to make a
Board
motion if
Member.
you're ready.
If you want to say Ms. Davis, that's really what, go
That's
ahead.
fine. I was going to make a motion if.
Oh, please.
If there is
Oh,
anyone
let me
else.
just ask, does anyone else in the audience have any I guess you should make the motion first. I'm sorry, go ahead, Cindy.
Okay. I move that the committee forward recommendation to the board for approval of the data sharing agreements. Do I need to list those?
Both numbered. I think that's okay. The motion is to forward to the board the 2 recommendations for data sharing requests. One from Rosalia Pacheco and the second one from Natalia Palacios, both of which have been approved by USBE staff. Does anybody in the audience have any additional concerns or questions about those? Superintendent Shoemaker, would you like to proceed?
Thank you. Terry Shoemaker with the Utah School Boards Association and the Utah School Superintendents Association. I just want to make a comment on the need for this type of research for these programs. We have large numbers of students involved in these types of programs across the state. And we get requests often about how well is their performance. And so as this research is being considered, I think that's very important in light of the funds that are being expended, not only by the state. The state expends some funds, but the school districts are expending lots of funds
Right.
associated with expanding these programs, which are very popular with parents across our state. And they're doing many good things for kids. So having more research available for school districts in this area, I think, is significant, and I'm pleased to hear that the board is interested in adding to that data.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Any other comments by board members? Then I think please, Mr. Haynes.
Sorry, I may be a little naive here. Does all of this data reside at the state, or are we requiring the districts open the books as well, and somebody at the district level be responsible to provide that data?
And I'll let
Or is-
Whitney answer that question.
We have all of the data
Oh, okay.
requested.
Okay, so there's no additional burden put on the LEAs at all, it's all, and then we can work directly with these entities to share that. Okay, thank you.
So I already repeated the motion, and so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed? Thank you, it was unanimous. So our last item on the agenda is another action item, R277-464. It's a little bit of a redo from last month, school counselor direct and indirect services. It's a new rule, and come on down.
And I'll be.
Oh, that's fine. Oh. Oh.
Want to take a stretch break or anything? He's just over in one of the pieces.
Sure, or just
know. It
kind of
was
move
up to
around.
you. If
Thank
you
you.
want
No,
to
let's wait for Jeff. That'd be great.
Yeah. And if he can't join us because he's doing another item, Ben and I are ready to support too.
Okay.
And
Okay.
just, can I just make an announcement while
Sure,
we're breaking?
please.
Just, it says on the background memo that staff was going to present draft 4, but actually it is draft 5 that's been up there for a while. I hope that board members that you reviewed draft 5 and not draft 4. Let us know if you, anyway, it's draft 5 that we plan to present. The green and the purple language, they're both actually from, some amendments were made in draft 4 and some in 5. So
They're all new since last month.
just the green and
The green is
purple.
new, the green and purple are new since last month.
Yes, and based on the feedback that we got from the committee last time we met in June.
Thank
So-
you. So we'll just be looking at that
ready
for a
for
minute.
that.
Well, I'm going to go get a drink really quick, so that'll give you a little more stalling time. Is he in the building? Did Elvis leave the room? Upstairs. Give him a couple more minutes, then maybe we'll just get started. I think maybe, can we just get started? Is that okay? And if Ben can add what he knows, and when Jeff comes, I'm sure he'll add more. So do you want to tell us, just remind us, well, introduce yourselves and welcome, and then help us remember what the purpose of this is and why the changes came about.
Kim Herrera, School Counseling Program Specialist.
Christy Walker, Safe and Healthy Schools Coordinator.
I want to start off by thanking the committee for all the conversation and feedback that we've had so far. I feel like we've been working to be very responsive to what you've asked. Really, draft 5, what that represents is we wanted to be responsive to the ask of being clear and explicit in our definitions, and we felt that this document allowed us to comply to the law without having to reference the entire model, since not all of those who would be following this board rule would be required to implement the full model. And so that is why now there is now a separate document. And so just to remind us of the context of the law, it directs the board to adopt rules that define direct and indirect services, the amount of time school counselors spend in direct and indirect services, and prohibited school counseling activities.
Okay, and so last month, I guess we had the committee had a lot of questions, and so the green and the purple, the new amended language clarifies. One of my questions last month, and I'm forgetting the answer, I think we talked about it last month, was the changes to the law that we're responding to partially said recommend, and this doesn't have that recommend language. So for Board Member Haynes, the law that this is in response to, the bill that this is in response to, was from Representative Pulsfer, and the bill had said that the board should create rules that recommend to LEAs the direct and indirect service proportional times. I'm not saying that exactly right, but is that the gist of it? Mm-hmm. And so that's why we're looking at this rule, and we've already beat the thing to death, so that's why I was just telling you. So just tell me how this goes, how that deals with the recommends.
Right, and so I feel like from that conversation, we were discussing what that recommend in the law means, and it is that the board is recommending what that looks like, not that the LEAs are recommended to do it. It's what we recommend what direct and indirect services are, as well as the time allocation within that and prohibited activities. Within the document that it references, if you turn to page, I wish I would have numbered the pages.
You mean the
but
document that, you're not talking about the rule, then you're talking about
correct,
that other.
that it references. It's called School Counseling Services.
Got it.
So
Document.
instead, the biggest change from Draft 4 to Draft 5 is Draft 4 referenced the program model. Draft 5 references this document only.
And to clarify, it's incorporated by reference for those in the audience, so that that becomes part of the rule by incorporation.
Thank you.
And then where does this document come from? What's its?
So it is adapted from the American School Counseling National Model, as well as the Utah School Counseling National Model. So the language, so school counseling programs were adapted in about 1980. And so the language.
Just like you guys. Let's hear what she has to say, and then we can, or maybe just wait for 1 sec, Kim, and then
Absolutely.
we'll get this up.
Can you hold on? And if you're on Civic Clerk, it's this document right here. It's the fourth one down, the fourth link down. Is it posted on our website or not yet?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Document, right.
Yes.
Everybody on the same,
So this is what will be referenced in the.
Yes.
yes,
And
that's
it's
what will be incorporated by
right here.
reference, to be specific. So now, do we have it up there? Or?
Yes, what
Oh,
we have.
or you're trying?
No.
Okay,
So-
now Kim, will you
Yes.
start over? I'm sorry,
Yes,
but I
no
want to
worries.
hear what you have to say.
Yes. So the law references language that have been established since about the 1980s. So the law references language that is direct and indirect services and prohibited activities for school counselor and time allocation. That is language that has been adapted from the American School Counseling Association since the 1980s and have been in practice ever since. And so we are just utilizing the language that has been in practice from the American School Counseling Association, as well as our Utah School Counseling Program Model, because that program model is adapted from the national model. So that is where the language in this document is coming from.
Got it. That's helpful. And it'll be incorporated by reference then. Go ahead, Angie.
One thing I wanted to refresh your memory on is one of the concerns last month was whether we state the definition, whether we point to the document, and actually the committee asked staff to rework this rule and direct or cross-reference this document. So you'll see now, if you look at the definition of indirect services and non-school counselor activities and direct services, we now point to the document in section 3, which will be this document that's uploaded and attached. So that was actually one of the largest or biggest asks that you all asked us to do, was to incorporate the document by reference, which is all that green language in the incorporation section, and then instead of restating the definitions, to go ahead and link to this document, which is consistent. As a reminder, I know we always talk about these things over and over again, but is consistent with the school counseling program model that some LEAs are receiving a grant under R277462, right?
But it only references Appendix C. It doesn't refer to the whole program now.
Right.
Which is what is the conversation last time is that it is confusing to have to refer to the whole model when they're not implementing the whole model. And within that model, this was defined in Appendix C. So we've just separated that out.
Yeah.
And now you have more explicit clarification and definitions.
So just to make sure I understand, all schools, this will apply to all schools regardless of whether or not they get the grant. Is
yes,
that right?
the funding for
So then
approved
we
school
can give the same information and directives to all schools, not have to give different directives to those who get the federal grant. Is that right?
Correct. And just to clarify, all 41 districts fall under approved school counseling programs. So this would their expectations would supersede this anyway. We have 32 charters who are in approved schools, which equals to about 30% of our charters are already following the program model. So it would just be those remaining that would only be adapting this.
Okay, adopting.
Yes.
Board Member Davis.
I'm trying to process what you just said while I was thinking about what I was thinking about at the same time.
Sure.
So you're saying districts follow a certain model that would supersede this? Did I hear you say that?
Well, it would take this and expand to the rest of the program model. This is in the they're going to be following this anyways, but there's other expectations that they follow to receive funding for school counseling programs.
And schools in general are going to be following this anyway based on some other code?
So the rule 462 governs
Only
our
if they
school
get the
counseling
federal grant.
programs. Yes. And so by incorporation of the model, they have to follow the entire model.
Okay, so can I ask a follow-up, Chair?
Please.
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around this because in our last meeting, I think I was under the misperception that we wanted to make sure that planning stayed in direct services because so much of what counselors do work with planning and students and things like that and scheduling and whatnot. But I think I was under the impression that testing administration was in indirect services, not in inappropriate activities. So help me understand, because I've been checking in. I'm a liaison with our board, with our local boards too, so I'm trying to get feedback from our local boards while we're talking as well. But and I may call Terry Shoemaker up if that's appropriate,
Sure.
Chair.
I'm happy to
but,
have him call.
But maybe help us understand if this now means that that can't even be done for 15% of the time. Is that what this is saying?
So that has not changed from what is supposed to have been in practice. So according, like I've said, within the last 30 years, the administration, the organization of testing has been a non-counseling duty. The interpretation and using the results of the testing has been a part of the direct services to students to guide planning, decisions, next steps, goals, and so forth. But that has not changed based off this rule. That should have already been in practice based on the program model that is currently in place.
Is that based on law? Can I ask that question? Is it
Sure.
based on law?
Is it based, is it based on, is the fact that what based on law?
No testing administration.
Oh,
Yes, it's based on the federal grant and R277.
462.
30 years ago.
Well, we have that rule and it's been in place for 30 years. The Standards and Assessment Committee, and I talked about this the other day, unfortunately, R277462 was recently amended, I want to say in like April-ish time, and the Standards and Assessment Committee got that. And then we got 464, and I think it would have been helpful because in a lot of ways, most of what I think you're concerned about, if we were to make any changes here, really the bigger beast or where we would need to make the changes in 462 and in the federal, that full program. But those requirements have been around for not just since this year, but for a very long time.
Okay.
so do you
That
want to
helps, but
speak?
Can we bring him up to,
Yes.
to get an opinion?
Superintendent Shoemaker, again.
Excuse me, Terry Shoemaker with Utah School Boards Association, Utah School Superintendents Association. So
So go ahead. Cindy, ask whatever question you have.
Oh. So I'm just wondering about feedback from a local board and a superintendency opinion on this, in particular with testing and administration being in inappropriate activities versus in indirect activities. But it sounds, I mean, because what is practice, and is that conflicting with what has been in code?
So what has been in code for 30 years has been in code for 30 years. In practice, though, let's just take a small school. Let's just take a little high school or a little middle-level school. So the school counselor might be in full FTE, he or she might not be a full FTE. So all the appropriate activities are going to get done. But in that same school, the school counselor is likely, and I'll use the word highly likely to be given some additional assignments to help the principal, who also has all the administrative duties that could be assigned maybe to an assistant principal. They may or may not have one, but they have the school counselor. So they use the school counselor for some administrative work. They use the school counselor for help with administrating testing. You guys know this goes on. I'm not saying it doesn't. They're not going to say it doesn't. I'm telling you it does. Okay? So the 30 years of it being in rule is great, but there will always be, in these small schools, additional assignments given to additional personnel. So I'm just going to tell you that's not unlikely to change much. We can test and train and help and audit and do all we can to do with that. But when you've got 100 kids and you've got to meet the core curriculum that we have, and we've got the testing that we have, and all of the additional things that go on with the activities programs that we have, then you're going to need help to accomplish those things in those small schools. So I'm not disputing that this isn't a good thing or even the right thing to be doing here. I'm just letting you know that this is difficult to do in our very smallest schools. Exactly what we're talked about here. We talked about and continue to talk about the need for flexibility here. This rule, if we were to use this as the guideline, limits flexibility quite a bit. But I'm not saying it shouldn't be put out there based on the 461, Rule 461, because that's basically where this is coming from for the most part. Okay? So with that in mind, I'm not sure I'm helping or hurting here. I'm just letting you know there is great need for flexibility in our smallest schools across the state, and often those counselors are placed in many of those roles.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Go ahead, please.
Do you see examples of, or are there smaller areas where, because obviously one FTE is going to be above the recommended student to counselor ratio in certain areas. Do some small districts hire a counselor and have them like, here's your counselor time slot 0.75 and here's your test administration time slot, and then the numbers are distributed within your counselor time period? Are those options, and do people take that?
Well, you can answer.
route?
I think she's asking me.
Okay.
The answer is yes, that occurs too. Okay. There are also comprehensive guidance funds associated with this, things that have to be done too if it's in a high school. Okay. So there are things that have to occur. And so yes, districts are supplementing when they can. And sometimes the school counselors are at more than one school. As I said too, there also could be listed in the counseling portion of what's being paid there, portions of it, or they could be part-time. So all those options exist today, and I don't have specifics to say at this school it looks like just like that.
And I would dare add that I think at some schools it's not clearly defined, that in effect, some of the part of a counselor is being paid for with counseling funds, and part of it might be paid for out of their more general funds.
Or necessarily exist in small school funds.
Right.
Or.
Yeah, so that's possible. Ken, did you have something to add?
I was, but he answered it beautifully.
Okay, all right.
But I do want to say that we do ask LEAs to code it that way in Cactus. So by October 1st, when I pull the information for our ratio report, only their time that they're implementing the school counseling program is
Right.
counted towards the ratio. And so we do ask LEAs to code that in Cactus.
Okay.
That's good.
And one more thing, Cindy, before you, I just want to make sure that you were referring to a prohibited, because it says direct and indirect, and assessments not, or assistance with assessments not in either list, so it must be in that other document. Is that
Inappropriate.
correct? Okay. Because I closed that and opened this. Okay, go ahead.
I guess I just need to understand the extent of the law. Inappropriate activities, does the law saying a counselor cannot do inappropriate activities, or is it saying up to 85% and up to 15%?
It's no more than 15%, or you can do more than 85, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I
Please.
started answering.
Go ahead.
It's at least 85% in the appropriate or direct, I think, and no more than 15%.
Right.
on the indirect.
Right.
And one other thing, I just want to kind of channel HB 81 and remember that on one hand, we're talking about this side, but Representative Pulsifer was actually hearing from counselors who were wanting their districts to not have them engaged in the inappropriate activities.
I
So
don't
you
disagree. I mean, I
because
agree, but it's a tough transition.
it is.
Well, and reality's tough.
Reality
given
is
funding.
difficult.
And I don't know if you wanted to speak to the mental health. It was a school safety concern about students wanting more access to school counselors, and I don't know, is that what you were going to say,
And all
Christy?
that's true. Go ahead, Christy. But
Yes,
I kind of think we know that would be in a perfect world, that would be what's happening, but we aren't there. And it's now not only an imperfect world, but it's an underfunded world. So, but go ahead and add your thoughts.
Right, absolutely. So I just wanted to add to what Angie was saying and you, Madam Chair, as far as the birth of that House bill came out of a concern where counselors were unable to meet the needs of the students within their school while they were in crisis because they were doing non-counseling duties. And those non-counseling duties couldn't go anywhere else because the assignment was specific to them. They were overseeing those things. And so the restriction of whether counselors should or shouldn't do those things, I mean, we know that's not necessarily reality because they're a vital member of the whole school and the school climate, and their job is to serve every student. And so sometimes those non-counselor duties are also compensated, and it's asked that they do those things outside of their regular school hours as well, their contract hours. And so this is to protect their ability to serve students and provide those responsive services, especially in high need situations where there's a whole school in need of them to be available and making that possible. And so I hope that addresses some of those concerns. Thanks.
Cindy, did you have?
No,
I had one more follow-up to that. Is there any penalty? I mean, practical penalty, I guess, in the extreme, this grant could be canceled or could be recalled or whatever. But as a practical consequence, is there any real penalty for the not honoring those, either the prescribed activities or the prescribed percentages?
Need to answer that?
The penalty, if that's okay, sorry,
Sure.
I didn't write. It would be in the R277462 program model. There are funds that are being received by the LEAs, and that's where that funding could be taken away. But when you talk about this rule right here, there's not money. It's not a grant program similar to 462. So really the enforcement mechanism is going to be in the 462 program, the counseling's, that program model that 41 districts and about a third of our charter schools are participating in. Is that correct? And that's also the program that they would be monitoring. They do, I believe, is it every 3 years or 6 years you do?
It's on a 6-year review cycle, but the districts review internally on year 3 and we review formally on year 6.
And Terry, go ahead, and I'll ask my question.
Thank you. I just wanted to let you know that what we're saying here, what everybody is saying here, what's not being talked about enough is the fact the reason there's counselors are doing a whole bunch of other things is because the funds aren't available for other people to do other things. And so we end up, like we do with everything else here in the state of Utah, in our education system, having to use people who have very specific assignments to do other additional assignments. It's just part of the fabric and culture of the education systems.
And my question was just, do you folks know, who've been in school counseling for a long time, do you know of any time that schools and LEAs or schools funding for counselors has been withdrawn, withheld, recalled based on problems with this? Violations?
When we review, remember we're reviewing the entire program, and this is one aspect of the program. And if there are some non-compliance, we give really good, strong recommendations and then follow up with them with the following year to make sure that they're working and trying to get those in place. We do not automatically just pull funds. We really try to build capacity in the schools to meet the requirements. Since being at the board in the 3 years, I've had one LEA charter that had funds not approved coming on as a new program because they didn't have it in place, but I have never seen a funding pulled.
Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to know. Okay, Cindy, one more question?
I was going to make a motion if you're ready.
Oh, please, make the motion.
I move that the Law and Licensing Committee approve R277-464 Draft 4 on first reading and forward to the board. Draft 5 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
I think I don't see, let me repeat the motion. The motion is that the Law and Licensing Committee approve R277-464 Draft 5 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any other additional thoughts or comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed? Thank you. Thank you very much, Christy, Kim. Thanks very, very much for your comments and your
Glad we
thoughtful
got it
work.
sorted out.
I think that's our last item, right? We're adjourned. I wish I were Joel and had a gavel, but I don't. So,
This won't work.
no. Thank you. Thank you for the support in my inaugural, yeah, good job, Mike.
Yeah, but then I get to.
My inaugural, our debut is what is our debut.
Totally.
But it wasn't until we got discussing it that I was like, okay, I think we actually have that on the inappropriate instead of.
And I agree with.
I'm glad we got to the place where you're happy. Or at least satisfied.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure I included that information for the user people, but I didn't really check if it was there, so I didn't know that. Who knows, maybe next month.
That's why we have the committee process. So that
Yeah,
we can-
yeah.
we can
Kind of
focus on
those
those
things
things.
out,
Yeah.
tidy it up.
Yep.
Well, have a good weekend.
You too. You guys have had a long